Hey there. So this video is going to focus on the layer editor. And so the reason why is because I have many elements here that actually need more variation to them. So for example, we have these wires, and I don't want every single wire to be the same color, right? I might want some red, green, and blues, maybe some yellows. These circuit boards, I just literally tossed into green, but there's some heat sinks on here, then there's some chips and capacitors and things like that. There's a back plate. These cameras and lights, maybe there's some glass elements to them and things like that. Now, the glass elements we're actually going to make in a separate chapter because it requires us to delve into actually using shaders and changing them up. So I'm not going to explore that in this chapter. But yeah, like even here, for example, we have these canisters here, and then there's no metal parts to them at all. They're all plastic and kind of boring looking. So yeah, I want to add a little bit more variety and life to this model, and then and also explore some of the masks and things that are available to us within the layer editor. So what I've done here is I have selected the UTM, I've soloed the object, and the reason why I chose this object is because it's made out of many parts. It's got some resistors and capacitors and chips and heat sinks and things like that, and it's got a backplate here. So it is a interesting object from that point of view, that it's going to have many materials because they're all made out of different materials. And this way it'll allow me to explore the layer editor in greater detail, as I'm going to be using it to populate all these different materials onto this one object. I was going to talk about all these layers, but you know what? Let me just delete everything. I'm going to start from scratch, and we're going to build up and talk about everything that I'm doing. So we have no materials right now, no properties applied to this object whatsoever. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to want to apply a base to absolutely everything. So you can do that by adding a fill layer, and you'll get a fill layer. And in the properties, you'll notice properties, fill. Now I can change this name, right? So base metal or base material. And no matter what you rename it, it's still going to tell you that it's a fill layer, because it is in fact a fill layer that you've used. And this base layer comes with a number of properties. So under this material tab here, this material is right now being applied to the color, metal, rough, normal, and height. And I know this because there's a line right beside every single one of these, and the text is bolded. Now, I don't want the material, this one, to be applied to the height or normal, so I'm going to turn them off right away. And the object, the board that I'm coloring right now, is actually not metal, so I'm going to turn that off as well. And the cool thing is that you might have noticed this area here is actually, those properties that I've turned off, they're literally turned off from the interface as well, which is awesome, because when you're viewing somebody else's materials, or even working with your own, you're not going through long lists of properties, when in fact you're only interested in two, because only two are actually enabled. So the user interface adapts to the conditions that you've set. Now I could, for example, leave these on and not change them, right, or completely turn them off, but again, this gives me with too many properties to work with. So I'm going to turn these off for future reference if I need to ever manipulate anything, and it keeps things a little bit simpler for me. So there is going to be a little bit of roughness to this material. The base color is actually going to be a greenish value, like that. And you know what, maybe even rougher, yeah, something like that. Okay, so I have a roughish material, and I should turn back the normal off. Okay, so I have something to here, but right now it's perfectly uniform, so the color is actually applied perfectly to this object. And I know that because if I press C, right, base color, it's perfectly white, and the roughness is also perfectly gray, and there's absolutely no variation to it. So we want to change that. Press M to get back to the material mode, and we're going to want to add to this. So let's add a fill layer, another one. And this time, well, first of all, when you add it, you'll notice that it's completely painted over any work that this layer below is doing. So we want to get rid of that, because this new layer, we only want to use it to affect the roughness value, and then add a procedural cloud over it, so that the roughness will not be applied over everything equally. It's going to have some variation to it. So in order to do that, we first of all have to start off with a color. But again, under the properties fill, we don't want to change the actual color of the object, so I'm going to turn that off. I'm not changing the property of the object by changing it from like plastic to metal, so I'm going to keep it off, right? And I'm not adding anything to the normal or the height. So I turn everything off, and the only thing I keep is roughness. And I can give it whatever value I want. And you'll notice that if I drag left or right, it's not changing anything in the layers editor here. And that's because right now I am viewing the base color. So if I change this from base color to roughness, now as I'm changing the values, you'll notice that the values inside here, inside this layer, are changing as well. So be mindful of whenever you change a property for a channel, you have, in order for you to see the changes inside the layers, you have to go to that same channel within the layer editor as well. So I'm going to make it something like this, where I'm going to make it very rough. But now I want to add some more breakup. And in order for me to add breakup, I'm going to have to add a mask. So I'm going to right click and add black mask, in this case, right? Which doesn't do anything, right? So even now if I apply or I turn off this layer, it's not doing anything at all, versus before, if I had a white mask, it would apply it to this object. So I want to add some kind of generator to it, right? I want to add some procedural aspect to this mask. So if I right click and then I scroll down to add generator, I can do that, and then under the properties generator, it'll give me this, which is not much yet because I haven't selected a generator to work with. So if I click on here, I'm going to be given a few options. And right off the bat, well, first of all, if you scroll over these, you'll get some kind of icons usually. But in this case, I'm not seeing one that I like exactly just yet. So my best option will be either MG Mask Builder or the one right beside it, which is not showing you the icon of. But anyways, I'm going to use this one. And this one will give me plenty of options to work with. And also, if I go to press C until I get to roughness, you'll see that it is in fact working. If I turn it off here, now you see perfect gray. Now you see some values. So if I change some of these properties, right, like levels and contrast, things like that, and then maybe add some grunge. So I'm going to expand this grunge and then add some more scale to it, and maybe some secondary, and then I can turn on AO on or off. So anyways, I can basically dial in the exact values that I want for this roughness value. If I want to see how it actually looks overall, I'm going to press M again, and now I get something like this. So this is nice because now I have a material for this base that's got some level of roughness, and this looks okay for now. I can refine it later, but for now, it's good. So as we continue working, and we're going to add all sorts of materials to this, we should probably keep organized. Because right now, if I keep layering one material over another, over another, over another, I'm going to end up with too many layers because of the fact that every single one of these material types will also have some dirt layer on top of it, right? And options like that. So I'm going to create groups for every single material, and then I'm going to make the like everything, all the properties that are contained within that material, I'm going to contain it within that group. So if I left click and select the base material and then shift and left click the top layer, I can now create a group out of this. So Control G, and I have a folder. So as you can see, much like the smart material, I can now expand and close this folder. And I'm going to rename this to base material. And now I'm going to be able to work on top of this. And for now, I'm going to collapse this because I'm not interested in the properties or the layers within this material here. So with this one selected, I'm going to now click on the add fill layer. And now you notice that it completely filled over the layer below because there's no mask, right? So it's completely it's stacked on top of the layer below, and it's completely covering it with all these values. And because we're applying the color, metal, rough, normal, and height, it's going to be covered 100%. If I turn off the color, you'll notice the layer from below is in fact showing, because I'm not overriding the color anymore with this layer. But I do want a color for this material, and I'm going to be, because I'm going to be working on these fins here. So the fins will not have any normal or height information, so I'm going to turn those off. And now I can go ahead and play around with these values. So these fins will be in fact metal, so if I go into the properties under metallic, I'm going to change it from black to white, so it is in fact metal now. And I'm going to remove the roughness and then zoom in on the object. Now, I don't want a perfect mirror finish like this. It ends up looking a bit ugly. So I'm going to increase the roughness just ever so slightly, but just enough so that the details are just a little bit blurred. And it's also going to expand the specular hit on this object. So the reflection will be a little bit more broad across the surface. But again, the main problem that we have right now is that this material is being applied to everything, and I don't want that. I'm going to want it to only focus on the metal objects, and then leave the boards that we have underneath out of it. But before I go any further, I also want to create a group for this, because again, it is a new material that I'm working on. So first of all, rename it to shiny metal, and now Control G to create a new group, and I'm going to name that as well. And the reason why is because I might want to add more layers to this in the future. So yeah, sure, I have a shiny metal, and then I might have also a dirt layer on top of it or something else. And I'm going to collapse that. So we have two materials stacked one on top of another, but I don't want to show only this one. I want to show a little bit of this one as well. So if I right click and then add white mask, it's going to, well, first of all, flood it with white, and nothing changes. But by allowing me to, well, first of all, the reason why I added a white mask and now a black mask is because if I added a black mask, it would completely hide this material, and then I would have to select every single metal object on here. And there's a lot of them. But there's only a few boards. So by doing the inverse of that, if I apply a white mask, it colors everything with this metal material, and now it only allows me to select only a few board objects. So we do that by going over to here, so polygon fill, and under polygon fill, I don't want to select by UV chunks. I want to select by mesh, and if I choose a white value on a white mask, nothing's going to happen. So I have to change the value that I'm going to paint. I mean, in this case, it's going to be black, because I want to subtract 100% from this mask, and I want to reveal this material 100%. So I'm going to click on that, and over here, and then over here, and here. Okay, so this is pretty good. And now we're going to be able to move on to the next material. So next up, I'm going to paint the black chips over here. So I'm going to quickly go and make a new layer, and right away press Ctrl G to put it inside a folder and name it chips. And when I expand it, I'm going to name this white plastic. And then I'm going to make another fill layer, and this one's going to be black plastic. Okay, so these chips will be made up of two different materials. I'm going to have the white plastic underneath, and I'm going to actually have not black plastic, I'm going to have black coat. Okay, so something like that. Now I have to change the properties of both of these, right? So if I go to the white plastic, I know for a fact that it's going to be smooth, right? So it's not going to have any height or normal, so I can just turn those off. And at the same time, I'm going to also remove the metal property from it, because it's not a metal. So I have white plastic that's relatively rough, and then the black coat on top of that. I can change that to make it just a little bit off black. And again, it's not a metal, so I can turn that off, and it's going to be relatively smooth, so I can turn off the normal and the height. So I only want the color and the roughness. And the roughness for this object, I mean, if I go between these two layers, the white and the black coat, I want to make sure that the black coat is a little bit shinier than the layer below. Okay, so I have these two, but now I want to make sure that it's only isolated to the actual chips. So if I go back to here and apply a white mask, or black mask actually in this case, it's going to clear this layer, and now I can select the objects that pertain to this layer. And once again, I go to the polygon fill, I go to mesh, and in this case, because again it's a black mask, I want to make sure that I paint with a white value and not with a black value. So I'm just going to very quickly select everything that I want to belong to this layer. So now it's time for me to separate the black coat from the white plastic, or rather reveal the white plastic from underneath the black coat. So first of all, create a white mask to not really change anything, and then we're going to apply some generators to the mask in order to reveal the stuff underneath. So if I right click and go to add generator, and then under properties I select the generator, in my case the MG metal, I get something like this, which is not what I want because I actually want the inverse of that. Well, luckily enough for us, there is under the properties, if you look under the parameters, there is an invert function. So I can invert and I get exactly what it is that I want. Now, also I should note that right at this point, the one thing that I did change in that time lapse is the height information. So I actually did add a height to this black coat, and I increased it just ever so slightly so that it would give me a sort of bump effect here. Okay, like that. So I have this, basically some of this edge wear, but I'm not exactly liking it 100% yet, so I'm going to have to go back into the mask, select my metal edge wear, and maybe change the curvature so that less of it is actually chipped away. So something like this is better. Now I need to add some dirt on top of it, because right now when I look around it's just a little too clean. So let me add another layer, and in this case I don't want to affect the color, not the metal, not the normal, not the height. I just want a roughness in here. I'm going to increase it until something like that, and then add a mask also. So black mask, and then remove effect, and then add a generator, select the generator, and I'm going to choose the dirt, and then I'm going to play around with the dirt until I get something that I like. So do I want anything on the edge masking, right? Dirt contrast. I don't want to cover it 100%, but just enough so that I can see that it is in fact dirty. So something like this actually works pretty good, right? It's not perfect, but it's not 100% perfectly shiny. So this is what I want. Now, if I were to, for example, copy this mask from the black coat over to the dirt, I would do that using one of two ways. You can't, for example, just copy and paste using Control-C, Control-V. That unfortunately doesn't work. So, like as you can see here, if I just right-click on here, I only have the ability to move and remove. But if I click on the actual mask itself and I right-click, then you see a bunch of options here. I can invert mask, clear, remove, export mask to file, etc. But then I also have here copy mask and paste into mask, or create mask. So by creating a mask, what I could do is I could actually save this as a separate preset and then apply that preset into here. So in case if you have something that you like, you can reuse it. But the cool thing is that if I have multiple layers to this mask, I can then save that as a preset. And that's pretty much where it really comes in handy. So in this case, I want to just go ahead and copy mask and then select here on the dirt layer. Right, I should probably rename it to dirt. And then right click and paste into mask. Right, so really what I did is I overwrote my result. Right, so I've literally copied the mask and pasted over it. But if I wanted to add on top of it, I would have to actually create a preset. So let me undo that, and let me now go ahead and do this and create a smart mask, which I've already done in the past. So what I'm going to do now is just use this inverted metal edge wear, and I'm going to paste it, or click and drag it in here. So now, as you can see, if I click and drag a smart mask, it'll actually work on top of any work that you've already done. So it's not overwriting anything. And then you can play with your what do you call it? With your blending values. And it doesn't have to be 100%. You can actually lower it or increase it however you want. Okay, so that's pretty much done. And next up, I'm going to focus on the capacitors and resistors and so I think finally we have a material that I could create a smart material out of. And now here's the thing. The reason why I didn't paint the board with all sorts of circuitry and things like that is because if I do any kind of paint work to this and then create a smart material out of it, when I apply the smart material to the object, well, in this case, this one here, what's going to happen is the paint will be distorted because the paint will be applied, it'll be very fixed in space, but if the UVs change between this object and this one here, then it's not going to work. So in this case, all I want to do is I want to apply all the materials, all the layers that make up the overall look, and then I can paint on top of that. So in order to create a smart material, I'm going to shift and select all these layers, and then just like I made every single one of these materials, I'm going to press Control G to create a new folder. And now with this made, with this folder created, I can now create a circuit board, MK, smart material, and then once this folder is made, right click and create smart material. So once that's made, you'll notice that it is in fact creating a circuit board material. And now we can try and find the other object, this one here, and then apply that smart material to it. So let's start applying this to it. As you can see right here, it looks like some of my faces are inverted. I can fix that on a model later. But for now, and I still have the plastic glossy material applied, so I'm going to first of all clear it and then drag and drop this smart material on top of it. And it's not going to look like much just yet because I haven't updated any of the masks. So that's the only thing I'm going to have to do is I'll go ahead and update every single one of these masks. And the easiest way to do this is by actually turning off all of the materials and working on my way upwards. So I'm going to select this mask in particular, and then it is a white mask, right? So I need a black value in this case, and select this, and I just want to select the board. Okay, just like that. So the boards have been selected. I can now go to the chips. So yeah, the only thing I really have to do is just invert these normals that I completely missed. And let's look at the entire object altogether. Right, so there is some color variation in the boards. Right, I like that. I like that. It definitely breathes just a little bit of life into this model, even though it's not living. Anyways, that's it for this chapter.